Pat, are you there?
I am here, Marty.
Fantastic. Well, you're the person we've been waiting for all day. So Pat's got a fantastic bio. Most of us know her already. She is the ex-head of GenSpring on the West Coast. She had founded her own family office prior to that, which merged with GenSpring. And then she's been kind of at the lead of family businesses, advocating for families in DC, Family Enterprise USA. She's also got another business where she's a tax advocate for people with inherent money and other aspects. So Pat, why don't you give your background and then get started? And we're going to go for about 25 to 30 minutes, okay?
Okay, sounds good. Thanks, Marty. So I shared the screen, but for some reason won't let me switch, so that you may all have to see this view as opposed to a different view. Let's see where I am here. All right, so I guess we're going to work in this. So as Marty said, I've been in the family office industry over 30 years. I started a single family office, the Field family, moved on, built my own multifamily office, sold that in January '09 to GenSpring, worked for GenSpring for 8 years, and then semi-retired. During that time, I ran an organization called Policy and Taxation Group. You can see both these organizations behind me. Its sole purpose is reform, repeal of gift, estate, and generation skipping tax. And in conjunction with that, I now run Family Enterprise USA. As you can probably appreciate, what hurts family businesses more than anything is the estate tax. It's at the top of their list. It's not always number one. It may be 1, 2, or 3 in terms of things that concern them. So that's what I want to talk to you about, because COVID has really changed practices for family businesses, family offices as well. And the world is dramatically different. And so I'm going to share the first slide is a project that we're working on right now with 2 professors, Joe Asterkam and Thorsten Piper. And it is going to determine how many family businesses there are in America, how many jobs they generate, how much GDP do they create. And this is just a preliminary results. It'll be out at the end of the year. And you might be asking yourself, why is this important? It's important because legislators and others need to know what is the economic impact of family businesses in America. The reality is 60% of the workforce is family businesses, and they generate 55% of the GDP in a broad spectrum of definition. That definition being that a family business is a family business if it is controlled by the family, either through management or through ownership. And there's much more specifics around this broad, narrow middle that I can give you. If you're interested, you have my email. I put it in the chat. When this work is done, I'm happy to share with anyone that's interested. Marty wants me to talk about what's going to happen in the 117 Congress. And I should have started by saying, I'm a person that likes slides. I'm a visual person. I like to talk with slides. Personally, I like to watch slides. So I apologize. I know Marty's not a big fan of slides, that I probably have too many slides. If you want to interrupt me, Marty, I'm leaving it up to you to just barge in anytime you want to.
Pat, I love your slides. They're the best.
All right. Everybody knows what happened. Everybody knows that the Democrats control the House. They controlled in the last session, but this time they lost 10 seats. So they don't have as quite of a stronghold. Republicans picked up 14 seats, but at the end of the day, Richard Neal still controls Ways and Means, and Ways and Means is very important because all tax legislation originates in Ways and Means. What you should know about Richard Neal, if you don't, is he tends to be more of a moderate Democrat. He is a former business owner. He works well with Kevin Brady, the former chair. Having said that, does that mean we're going to have positive tax legislation for family businesses? Not necessarily, because again, he has to work within his party. But at the very least, it may be helpful in countering some of the possible legislation that I'm going to be talking to you about. Everybody in the world now knows that the Senate is 50-50. And while that may seem, and Vice President Harris is going to be the tiebreaker with her vote. The Democrats picked up 4 seats. The Republicans lost 4 seats. Chuck Schumer is now the majority leader, but he has agreed to do that with Mitch McConnell. And this happened in 2000, where it was a 50-50 Senate, and they did work together, Republicans and Democrats, Ron Wyden, who's going to be chair of Senate Finance, said the same thing, that he will work with Chuck Grassley. Quite frankly, practically, they have to do that. While it may seem that the Democrats control because they've got Vice President Harris to be the tiebreaker, that's not really reality. All they need is one Democrat, like a Bernie Sanders, who can afford to vote against his party, and they don't have what they need. And in today's world, you still need 60 votes in the Senate to make things happen. Now, you can do a 51 vote if you do it under reconciliation. And yes, there will be reconciliation in this session of Congress, probably this year. And things will happen under reconciliation because the Democrats now want to show, as the Republicans did when they were in charge, we're in charge, we're going to get something done. But the world has become very polarized politically, as you all know. And so it's going to become more and more difficult. And I'm hopeful, not real optimistic, that we'll see some good legislation being done in the next 4 years. In terms of what is possible, what Biden has said he would do, not a surprise to any of you that he said he's going to change corporate taxes. He's going to raise corporate taxes. He's going to raise taxes on individuals as well. The Democrats are concerned about the income inequality in this country, and they believe raising taxes on the wealthy is the way to solve for that. Healthcare is also something that's important to both parties, but seems to be more important to Democrats, and everyone can understand why. And in fact, the COVID legislation that passed in last December was not enough for the Democrats. They intend to do another COVID bill in early this year. They want to work on the environment. They really are concerned about climate change. Having said that, it's not going to be at the top of their list. And they want to work on infrastructure, and so do the Republicans. So that's probably something that they can do together. In terms of Biden's proposal, as I mentioned, he wants to raise the individual rates back up to 39.6. He wants to eliminate itemized deductions or put a cap on them for people making over $400,000 a year. He wants to phase out Section 199, which is very concerning for us family businesses because 199 is that pass-through legislation. So if you operate as an LLC, an LP, or an S Corp, you're one of those pass-through organizations that got some benefit in the last tax bill in 2017, and you got a deduction. While it's complicated, you get a deduction. I'm not really sure why President Biden wants to phase out that deduction because all he's doing is hurting family businesses. But again, that's for people making over $400,000. He wants to increase capital gains. He wants to eliminate like-kind exchanges, once again, for people making over $400,000. And he wants a new Social Security tax, once again, for people making $400,000. Now, you might be asking yourself, how many people in America make over $400,000? Well, the answer is around 1%. So what I don't understand is tax policy that's driven toward 1%. I don't think anyone has scored this legislation, which is pretty common. These are only proposals. And this is what his proposals were to run for the position. So maybe it's not going to generate a lot of money. Maybe it's just a political positioning, which most politicians, as you well know, do. The estate tax, which is very important, as I mentioned, to family businesses, is going to change if Biden really gets what he wants. When he was Vice President Biden, he actually negotiated what's the current legislation before President Trump's tax bill. And that was a $5 million exemption and a 40% rate. But now he wants to roll that exemption back to $3.5 million, and he wants a 45% rate. And most importantly, he wants to eliminate step up in basis. So while that's a difficult concept, step up in basis, what you need to know is you pay a 40% tax on the full value of your assets. That's why they get stepped up to the new basis. Well, without a step up in basis, that means you're going to pay a 40% on the full value of the assets every single generation, because it will be carryover basis, and the next generation will pay once again on that appreciation. Every generation going forward will pay tax on that appreciation. And lastly, again, very concerning to family business owners, is he wants to eliminate the valuation discounts for family-related businesses. I've never understood, or family-related entities, not just businesses. Never understood why they're opposed to this. You know, Obama's administration wanted valuation discounts eliminated for family related because they believe, I guess, there's some sort of taking advantage of the tax code within family businesses. And I will tell you, for someone that's worked for family businesses for over 30 years, that is really not the case. So it's really unfortunate, but you need to look out for that. What do Republicans want? Well, not a surprise. They want to keep what's in place right now. They want to make the TCJA Act permanent and everything in that act permanent. They'd also like to reduce the rate of the estate tax from 40% to that of capital gains. So whether you die or you sell your business, you're not paying a different rate of tax. Bipartisan legislation, I've mentioned some of this already, like the infrastructure bill. It's possible there'll be bipartisan COVID legislation, minimum wage. Both parties really support minimum wage amounts. They just vary in terms of what that minimum wage is going to be. Manufacturing and research, they seem to have some things they can agree on there. Pensions, both parties support pension reform. And the tax extenders, which weren't done in the last session of Congress, should have been done in December 2020. Were not done. And so hopefully they will be done, and maybe they'll be retroactive to December. Having said that, it's very rare to have retroactive legislation. I get that question a lot. But in this particular case, these are tax extenders, so that does happen. So now I'm going to talk about family businesses and new practices. Do I have any questions, Marty, or any comments anybody wants to make before I move into that?
I think it's pretty good. It's pretty good right now.
Okay. All right. So new practices. Well, COVID has changed everything for everyone, and especially family businesses. This is a survey that we conducted this year during COVID. And what you should know is 81% of all family businesses were impacted, suffered because of COVID. 60% of those, even though they suffered, they didn't have any changes in their jobs. But 81% of them lost revenue, and they kept employees. Now, that doesn't mean that they kept all their employees, but many family businesses, and I can give you a lot of examples of this, businesses that have had employees for 60, 80 years, never terminated employees for economic reasons. Some of them finally had to terminate employees, but 81% of them managed to keep their employees. 69% of them supported those employees with benefits and wages during this time. 66% contributed to their local charities. Family businesses do that regularly anyway, but they stepped up their game. And 53% of them took advantage of PPP loans and government assistance. So COVID has really changed the way that family businesses are going to operate for a long time. While family businesses tend to operate long-term, they operate as a legacy business, always has been that way for family businesses, and more so as they grow. They want to be more prepared. They want to have more plans in place, and they're going to be prepared for the next pandemic. They're going to continue to work remotely. So that means less office space. And I'm sure you talked about that today on the real estate panel, how that's changing the real estate industry. They want to be more focused on keeping their employees safe from infectious diseases, because we all know this is not the end. And they've learned just how important it is, as well as the costs associated with keeping those employees safe. They're not going to increase expenses for things that they do not see necessary, or that they don't see the value for the risk that they expose their employees. As example, events, conferences. Not that they're not going to do events and conferences together, because everybody wants to connect. They want to be in the same room. They want to have that networking, but they're going to weigh the risk and the costs of having their employees in the room, and what's the alternative in terms of how this can be done with technology. They're going to have more community involvement, because, as I already mentioned, they always were very involved in their communities, but now they're going to be more involved because they really saw the benefits to them and their employees and to their communities. They're going to have more and better communication with their employees and their stakeholders, because once again, they learn the benefits of that. they had more transparency. They learned that while it was difficult because they had to figure out how much transparent to be, they were definitely more transparent than normal, and they benefited from that. They're going to have more outdoor venues or space available for employees to work and and interact and to think. They're going to consider, as many of them did, new lines of services or product that support them and keep employees. And I'm writing an article right now for Trust and Estates magazine that will come out in the next couple of months. And it's going to be all of the stories of family businesses and how they survived COVID. It'll probably be about a half a dozen of individual stories from different industries, because I think it's fascinating how resilient family businesses can be and the things that they did to get through this, and they're still doing to get through this pandemic. So family businesses, I've already mentioned, they're resilient, they're flexible, they plan for the long term. And so they are better equipped to adapt to changes like this, whereas non-family businesses, typically public companies, not that there aren't public companies that are family businesses, they have to report quarterly earnings, and so they really can't adapt as well. Succession planning is so important more than ever. And in our 2020 survey that we did, which was difficult because it was during the time of COVID, 88% of our family businesses tell us that they manage their business as a legacy, and they see it as a legacy to their children. But what continues to be interesting to me is only 47% of them have actually passed the ownership on to the next generation, which is pretty sad. This needs to change. It hasn't changed much in the last few decades. And what family businesses tell me is they tell me, well, I'm not ready yet. My son's not ready to take over the business. The industry is not ready. It's bad timing. There's all sorts of excuses, but I think COVID has made them realize just how important succession planning really is. Marty asked, go ahead.
I just want to ask you a couple of questions here.
Yeah.
So your family businesses, are they 100% owned by the families typically, or do they have other investors, or?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And, we talked about this, Marty, and I looked up the large family businesses in America. So of the 10 largest family businesses in America, there are about a half of them are public companies. But the way they are a family business is the family has the voting stock, and typically all of the voting stock. So while you kind of get the best of both worlds, right? Because you get the liquidity of being a public company. And I'll mention two of those. One is the Ford and the other is Walmart.
I was going to mention it. I was going to say it in the other order, but yes.
Yes.
The first ones to come to mind, right?
Right. But then you have Mars and Cargill, Coke. They're privately owned, 100% privately owned. So, but I think that's one way that family businesses can, again, have the liquidity, but also maintain their control.
And it kind of makes sense that, 88%, although want to have a legacy, they're kind of holding off on passing it. I mean, they're, it's kind of like, waiting for the 100% for the baby to leave the nest, so to speak, right? So, I mean, why do you think it needs to change? Do you think people need to hand off their businesses earlier?
Yes, because
and that is because of tax reasons?
No, it's because if you want your business to truly be a legacy, you have to engage the next generation, which I'm going to talk about.
Okay.
And you have to, all the studies have shown that the next generations are the ones that innovate and the ones that carry the business on from generation to generation. If a business doesn't innovate at each generation, they have a much less likely chance of success. And those next generations are the ones that do it. I will tell you that this is anecdotal on my part, that I really believe most of the time succession planning is not done because the founder can't get out of their own way, his or her way. And that's just not good. It's not good for them because they have identified so much with the business that they can't do anything else. And it's not good for the next generation because many of them end up leaving the business because they feel like they're never going to be vested in the business and they want a future. So I know it's hard It's really hard for founders to let go, but I think that's the biggest reason that businesses don't get passed from one generation to the next. And hopefully with COVID, they've seen what can happen and they really need that next generation.
Yeah, I think there's a whole bunch of issues that
Engaged.
are resulting from COVID and also just the general malaise of the United States, but continue.
So I'm going to talk about the next generation, X, Y, and Z generation. And we all know we hear a lot about the millennials, but we don't hear a lot about the X generation. And you should know that they're kind of the forgotten generation, but they generate 32% of US income. $50,000 is the average income. And despite being the smallest generation, they outspend the other generations in terms of housing, eating out, and entertainment. They are self-deprecating. Only 41% of them identify themselves as Gen Xers, as opposed to 61% of millennials who really think they are special. 35% of Gen Xers in the US have college degrees. So this means that they typically hold more powerful positions. Now, we have to take into account also, they are older than millennials, right? As I just explained. They spend more time on social media than the millennials, you might be surprised to know. They love their social media. 81% of them have Facebook's accounts. And, they do it to keep up with news and stay up with their kids. They spend 32 hours a week consuming media. They are discerning, well-educated, and they value quality and respect for knowledge. So if you're going to market to Gen Xers, and you should market to Gen Xers, even though they are smaller than millennials or boomers, you should not forget that they use traditional media. 48% of them listen to radio. 62% read newspapers. Now, they may read them on their phone, but they're reading newspapers. And 85% watch traditional TV. Gen Xers have an interesting relationship with their brands because they know that they're the forgotten generation between the boomers and the millennials. So 54% of them are frustrated that brands that continue to ignore them. So don't ignore them. And I think this is a very important statistic for business owners. Get an Xer and a millennial together decreases employee turnover by 50% and increases productivity by 11%. So it's good to have both, and it's good to address the next gen. So let's move to the very next gen.
There's some questions about where your data comes from.
Yeah, so I have various sources.
The data sets, statistical analysis. I know you work with firms.
I do not have footnotes on this one. If someone has a particular question about particular data, send it to me. I'll go back and into my research and I'll have it. I had the footnotes. I just, through time and transition, I've lost them. So various sources. Pew Research is one of them, I will tell you, and they do a very, very good job.
But Pat, I just want to kind of take one step back. This business that you run is a not-for-profit.
Yes. So
and a lot of the research that you get, it depends on donations. I mean, you actually pay for a lot of this research, right?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Now, I know that you work with Frank Luntz and you work on polling with him and other surveys, etc. So it's always great when there are people that help sponsor this kind of a product, because it's very meaningful information. And of course, your tax information is also fantastic in terms of next generation inheritance taxes. So.
Yeah, well, thank you for that, Marty. Yes, Family Enterprise USA is a 501c3. It's been around since 2007. We are different in that we're a national organization and we are not industry specific. We represent the issues of the families of family businesses in Washington, D.C. And as you know, Marty, I've been going to Washington, D.C. for 25 years, used to go a week a month, and I have a lot of Hill contacts, and I employ 2 law firms, Squire Patton Boggs and the Brownstein firm in Washington, D.C. And Frank Luntz and I have worked together since 1995 or 8, I forget which. And Frank, we just did some work with him. I'm going to share a few of his slides in this presentation today. Frank is our messenger, right? He knows how to craft the message so that we can communicate better with legislators around the issues of family businesses and, of course, the estate tax as well.
And you've got about 10 minutes to go.
Okay, that should be fine. So millennials. So millennials are 50% of the US workforce and 75% of the global workforce. So shame on you if you ignore millennials. And hello, they've taken over the boomers. They're now the largest generation. And that happened on July 1st of 19. 88% of them live in a metropolitan area. 81% of millennials expect companies to make a public commitment to their charitable causes and citizenship. 66% of millennials feel they have a responsibility to give feedback, and they are more likely to be loyal, brand loyal, for the rewards and other benefits. Millennials see themselves, and this is a little data. You can see this is data, I should say. This is from the Pew Center. This is probably 18 data, I'm thinking, but millennials see themselves as politically independent, at least more so than other generations. You can see that 50% on the graph on the left. They also see themselves as religiously unaffiliated at 29%. That compares to boomers that see themselves as religiously unaffiliated. So it gives you a sense of who they are. Now let's talk about the Z generation. The Z generation is really coming onto their own, born after 1996. And this is probably the most important statistic. 24 million of them were able to cast a ballot last November. And I think we saw how that impacted the election. They are more racially and ethnically diverse than any previous generation, and they are on track to be the most educated generation yet. Gen Zers have college-educated parents. They are progressive and pro-government. Having said that, that doesn't necessarily mean they approve government over business, and I'm going to share some of those slides with you. But they see the country's growing racial and ethnic diversity as a good thing, and they're less likely than older generations to see the United States as the superior nation. Gen Zers, 1 in 4 of them are Hispanic. And watch this, Generation Z is projected to become majority non-white by 2026. They're more likely than other generations to want an activist government. Gen Zs and millennials most likely say that climate change is due to human activity. And 43% of Gen Z Republicans are more likely than Republicans in older generations, like boomers, to say Blacks are treated less fairly. So in concluding the discussion about next gen, you really need to work with them, as I said earlier. They are the future, and you need to understand them in order to work with them. So you need to engage that next gen. I know it's a challenge, but they see the world through a different lens, and you have to understand that lens. They have different priorities. They focus on what's important to the world and for their children. They want to make a positive change, and they want to do this for the world. You all know, those of you in impact investing, that the next generations are all about impact investing. They want to change the world. They want their investments. They want their time and their money to make a difference in the world. And what is also important is you need a different form of communication. Focus on the present. Don't keep focusing on the past. And we tend to do that, especially us boomers. That's my generation. And they really appreciate it if you not only help them achieve their goals, but you help them develop lifelong goals. And sometimes I think in financial services, advisors feel a little reluctant to get involved personally. And maybe not so much family offices because they understand the personal attachment, but these generations, they want to get involved with you personally. They want you to help them achieve these lifelong skills. So in terms of the youth and corporations, this is one of Frank's polls, and I have a few different slides in here, but this was late 19. We just did one post-election 2020. We did 19, 18. We usually do a couple a year. In fact, we're doing one in the field right now. So you can see that when we asked, what corporations do you respect and support the most? Well, boomers say they support and respect those corporations that focused on serving America. Well, those Gen Zers, they really want corporations to be committed and focused on serving the world, as you can see, the 42%. When we asked about, is the country divided? Well, it's more divided than ever. We all know that. But look at the age groups, even those Gen Zers at 74%, they agree it's divided. And the older people get, the more divided they think the country is, with the boomers at 87%. So I think this is something that we should all be very scared of. This was done in 18. I'm sharing it with you because I want you again to understand these generations. When we asked them, have they stopped talking to friends and family because of the 16 election? 49% of these Gen Zers said yes, they've stopped talking to friends and family, whereas only 14% of the boomers. So they really, really take their issues seriously.
Well, Pat, I have to say that my daughter wasn't going to talk to me for a while, but then she needed money for college.
Yeah, I think it's really unfortunate that we become so polarized because, as you know, I work both sides of the aisle. I have great relationships on both sides of the aisle. Most people don't even know what party I'm affiliated with, nor do I want them to know, nor should they care. And that's the way it was. It's gotten worse. I really, really hope we can get back to that. So as a country, we can accomplish something. And while it sounds like the next gen are going to be more difficult, I'm inspired by them. And I really do think that they have to be our hope. And I hope that they can bring us back together. So we asked about what we think the biggest divide is in this country to voters. And you might be surprised at what is at the top. Once again, it is that Republicans and Democrats at the top. You might have thought it would be the fifth one on this list, which is people of color and whites, but it's 5. Government versus the people is second, rich versus the poor is third, elites and everyday, and then people of color and white, as I mentioned. So there is this political divide, not just in Washington, D.C., but this is throughout the whole country. I talked earlier about government and how millennials, not millennials, but next gen see government. Well, now this isn't just millennials or any particular generation. This is all generations. But I think I'm showing you this slide so that you can see that while people sometimes act like they're anti-business, they're not anti-business in general. And in fact, when you ask them, what has had more of a positive impact on you, government or business, 66% of them say business. And that includes 58% of Democrats. So they will opt for business over government in terms of the positive impact. And who's working harder for hardworking Americans? 77% say business works harder for me than government does, including 65% Democrats. So they get it. They understand the importance of business. And we have a whole slide deck around how business should articulate their message. And I will tell you that capitalism, Marty's seen me do some of these slides, capitalism, unfortunately, now is a very bad negative term. If you're going to use it, you should say economic freedom, because that, and you'll hear all the legislators on both sides of the aisle now say economic freedom. And this is my last slide, Marty. So we asked, what does the economic system in America is rigged against ordinary Americans? Do you agree with that or you disagree? 65% of Americans believe that the economic system in America is rigged against ordinary Americans, including 58% Republicans. So that's what you need to understand. It's been harder, as everyone knows, for the middle class struggles, and it's been difficult. And so I think that's part of the reason that you get these kind of answers. So Marty, that's it. Happy to answer any questions or take any comments anyone has. And I have not had the chat open, so.
Pat, can you talk about like your direction for 2021? What are your business's big goals that you want to try to accomplish? I mean, you've been around for a long time, and you have these really fantastic research, lots of good data. But how can people in our group help you? And what are tangible things that you're trying to achieve with this goal that we can help you get there?
We really need a louder voice for family enterprise. I really believe the 2017, the TCJA bill that Trump put through and the Congress passed, I really believe that did not help family businesses. That small 199A was it. family businesses are still paying a 35% income tax rate, and corporate America got 21%. And I believe it's because they spend so much time running their businesses, they forget that they are being thrown under the bus in Washington, D.C. So I'm adamant about pass-throughs and how important they are to this country. And the only way we're going to get legislation to support that is for legislators to know how many family businesses there are and the jobs they create and the GDP they generate, which is why we're doing
that through like letter writing or chat messaging or.
Yeah, so we needed to do the research. We have 7 professors working on this. We'll have it'll be done by the end of January, the report. The research has been done. I shared with you that one slide at the beginning. That information will go out, and people should, yes, advocate. If you're a family business, advocate, call, letter, write, email. The best thing to do is meet in person or Zoom. I do, of course, DC's locked down. It has been for all of 2020. So I do all my meetings on Zoom now, but that's really important. The other part of this is we need to at very least keep what we have, right? Especially around the estate tax. If that $11.5 million exemption goes away, all those small businesses that got to take advantage of it are now going to be paying estate tax. So that exemption needs to stay, and it needs to become permanent. And the rate, if it could be lowered to 20%, and we're instrumental, Policy and Taxation Group is instrumental in getting that legislation introduced last session of Congress in the House and the Senate. We hope to do it again this year. We hope to have bipartisan support this year because that's critical. And while we have people that philosophically support us, it's another issue to get to put their name on the bill. So I am very worried about this year around taxes for families and family businesses. And I tell people, if you don't advocate, if you don't stand up for yourself, you really don't have a right to criticize. You really have to. And it does make a difference, and it is effective, even though you may not think it is.
Sure. I mean, obviously, if you're taxing $8 million more, somebody's got to find it. And if you have to cut that from payroll, that's a lot. If the average job is 50,000, that's a lot of jobs. So
yeah. So Marty,
20 jobs per million people at 160 jobs.
So I love these statistics. So, but this is something that never gets pointed out. I hear a lot, as you know, I've worked for family business, wealthy families my whole career. And I hear a lot about they need to pay their fair share. And I never understand what fair share means. Even when we poll that, we never get a good answer from the voters. Well, right now, the top 1% of income tax filers pay 40% of all US income taxes. The top 5% pay 60% of all income taxes. And the top 10% pay 71% of all income taxes. The bottom 50% only pay 3% of all income taxes. So that's why the bottom taxpayers don't worry about taxes, because most of them aren't paying taxes, or they're paying a very small amount. Not to say they should pay more, but at the top, when you see that 71% of the taxes is paid by 10% of Americans, how much more can you tax them? There's only so much there. So I'm not saying that we don't have an income inequality. I'm not saying that those that have more shouldn't pay more. I just think we need to, make sure we pay attention to the facts and not be delusional about where the money can come from.
Yeah, there are issues, educational gaps in the United States. It's unfortunate. It's funny. I lived in Europe for a while, and I noticed that Europeans are incredibly politically educated, but not really great when it comes to business education. Probably Americans have the best business education in the world, but there's a gap between business education and understanding government and political education. It's just pronounced, and people don't get it. But it's a very quiet and silent sort of hand over people. So anyway, Pat, this was incredibly interesting and eye-opening, and so I'm looking forward again to more of your presentations in the future. This is really great, and I'm hoping that people will reach out to you, and we'll be sending your information to the different people. I think we had today. So what happened is that we targeted 350 registrants. We had about 450 as of yesterday, and then I had to kick out like 50 or 60 because they weren't really the people that I wanted in this event. And then I had another 50 signups today during the event. So it's been kind of crazy. So, but Pat, listen, I really appreciate your what you're doing and your efforts, and I hope that people in our group will reach out to you and work with you. So fantastic.
And I'm sorry I wasn't able to respond to the chat. So if anybody has a question, you've got my email in the chat. Don't hesitate to ask me. And thanks, Marty, so much for letting me come on today. I really appreciate it.
Fantastic. Thanks so much. All righty.
All right.
And then with regards to tomorrow, we've got a great day scheduled. We've got Fred Nasm kicking it off. We've got a fantastic fintech panel. We've got Dan Moorhead speaking about Bitcoin. And probably nobody knows it better than he does. And then we have a fantastic group of women general partners speaking. I just want to say that we just added the Urban Innovation Fund, which is a great group of women-owned smart cities fund. They're in San Francisco and New York, and they presented us maybe 4 or 5 years ago. Since then, they've grown a lot. They're really fantastic, innovative, and so a whole bunch of other great people. Nick Marcolo, who you see his picture on the screen, he's going to be part of the FinTech panel. And so thanks so much, guys. We'll be open tomorrow at 9 a.m. again. So thanks, and we'll see you tomorrow. All righty, thank you.
Bye, Marty. Take care.
Cheers.